Hi, my name's Samantha. This is my final project for History 354. I'm going to focus more on the causes leading up to the French Revolution. Before the French Revolution, the people were divided into three groups. There was the First Estate, which consisted of the clergy. The Second Estate was nobility. And the Third Estate, which was also the largest estate, was made up of the common people, such as urban workers, peasants. The Third Estate was immensely taxed, while the first two estates had many privileges, particularly exemption from most taxation. However, we see that not all of those who were considered noble had money or legitimate lineage. In the memoir Journal of My Life by Mentra, he talks about how the claim to trace their ancestry, how they claim to trace their ancestry when most of them are descended from servants, lackeys, and coachmen, which just further proves that not all titles meant that the nobles had money, but they still reaped the benefits of being in the Second Estate, which meant that they weren't taxed as much, if at all. The start of the French people's grievances were how the king and queen spent their money. King Louis XIV and Marie Antoinette spent money on lavish things, like Queen Antoinette would get a new dress every other day, which pushed the government into a financial crisis. That's not the only reason why the French people were upset, but one of the major. The other reason for financial crisis was the unfair tax structure that put more of the burden of taxation on the Third Estate, which was also the estate that was least able to pay for it, which meant the government didn't have enough money for what it was spending. Also, aiding the Americans in the American Revolution pushed the French further into debt. Not only did this contribute to the financial aspects that led to the French Revolution, but also the French soldiers saw how the Americans were fighting for their freedom from an oppressive government, and then they came back to France to live under an oppressive government with the king. The king attempted to solve the financial issues that were coming up by trying to eliminate some of the nobles' tax exemptions. Unfortunately, the nobility actually controlled the judicial organization, who blocked the king's move, forcing him to call a meeting of the Estates General in 1788, which he was not very happy about. The delegates of the Third Estate insisted that the three orders meet and the votes be taken by head rather than order, which would give the Third Estate the majority vote, which would be a much better advantage for them, because they would vote by estate and they would always lose with 2 to 3. This brought the creation of the king refused for the Third Estate's request, but the Third Estate also refused to budge through all the issues that they would go through. The Third Estate would eventually win over the king, and this brought up the social contract by Rousseau, in which he states, "The strongest is never strong enough to always be the master," which I think speaks to the monarchy and how the changes that happened were because of the strength of the will of the people, and that the king couldn't keep up his things for too long. And then this brought the creation of the National Assembly. the National Assembly created the influential document of the Declaration of Rights of Men, which stated that the idea that all men had equal rights under the law. And the National Assembly took action on the financial crisis by seizing church lands and allowing the state to control the church. The clergymen were actually required to swear an oath to the new constitution that was written by the National Assembly, and if they had refused, they were placed under arrest. Because of the extreme measures, the support for the new assembly was actually drawn away by the people because of they were in an overwhelming Catholic nation. After the changes, conditions started to worsen. Bread prices were high while supplies were low, and many blamed the king and queen for these shortages. Of those who blamed the king the most for the food shortages were the women, where they actually marched to Versailles, where the king lived, in the rain and demanded that he feed his people. The king would eventually give the women all the bread he had in Versailles. So with the food shortages that were already happening, and then the rumors of the French troops marching to the capital were pushing the people to believe that they were going to be used against them, the soldiers were. This, with the dismissal of the finance minister Necker, ignited the spark of the revolution. This prompted mobs to search for weapons and ammunition. However, the ammunition was all stored at the Bastille, which caused the storming of the Bastille on July 14th, 1789. By the end of July and to the start of August, there were riots in the countryside where the peasants started to burn the nobles' chateaus and destroyed the documents that stated their feudal obligations, which their feudal obligations were basically the contracts at which they lived by and worked by for the noble person. And basically in one night, the feudalism was destroyed in France. And after the women's march to Versailles, the king promised to make the move back to Paris, which would leave him, he wouldn't be so out of touch with his people. Although the king accepted the reforms of the new constitution, he couldn't accept all of them and decided to leave the country. He was caught at the border of Varnes. With this news, there was an increase in demands to the end of the monarchy and create of a new republic. Then we reached to the start of the French Revolution. There are many reasons for the French Revolution, but wealth inequality and the lack of political presence, especially for the Third Estate, pushed the French into a revolution of their own, which speaks to the same issues that the American Revolution had when the colonists were not represented and taxed in order to keep Parliament and the king happy. The American Revolution seemed to push the French to realize that things could be changed.